Indulge in all your holiday faves this season, knowing you're getting the good stuff your body craves with Kachava's all-in-one nutrition shake. It's your post-holiday recovery kit with 25 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, greens, adaptogens, and so much more. And it actually tastes delicious. With 6 indulgent flavors to choose from, it's easy to make a superfood-packed shake. From chocolate, vanilla, and chai to matcha, coconut acai, and strawberry, you can even savor the season with their limited edition chocolate mint. There are endless ways to personalize your cachava, whether you prefer it straight up or enjoy adding fruit, peanut butter, nut milk, or even iced coffee. With every 2 scoops of cachava, you're getting the highest quality ingredients. No fillers, no nonsense. Holiday nutrition has never been this easy or delicious. Go to kachava.com and use code NEWS for 15% off. That's Kachava, KACHAVA.com, and use code NEWS.
This is the story of the one. As an HVAC technician, he and his digital multimeter are in high demand. So when a noisy office HVAC turns out to be a failing blower motor, he doesn't break a sweat. With Grainger's easy-to-use website and product information, he selects the product he needs to keep everything humming right along. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Callers from West Virginia, we have Maury Richards on the phone. Maury is a retired Chicago Police Department lieutenant. He's also former police chief from Martinsburg, West Virginia. Maury, thanks so much for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Show. Very much appreciated.
Oh, thank you, Jay. Thanks for this opportunity. Appreciate it.
It's good to have you on. And I'll be honest with you, I think you're our first guest from West Virginia. And it's a state that, even though I policed in Baltimore, about the only place I ever went to in West Virginia was Harper's Ferry. And while it's a great spot, it doesn't represent the whole state. And it's a very diverse state. I've had several guests on from Chicago area, Chicago PD. So we look forward to discussing some of your experience. You just retired not that long ago, correct?
I did. I became chief in 2015 and just stepped down this June.
Well, congratulations on your retirement from Chicago PD, and also is it retired from the police chief position, or you just said, that's it, I've had enough?
Well, it wasn't a sudden decision. I thought about it for a while, but, 5 years is a pretty good run after, 24 in Chicago. And, here in Martinsburg, I came with, a number of goals, a certain vision. I think we accomplished, all of that. And, I felt my job was done and it was time to move on.
Well, thank you for your service. And thank you for being wise enough to say, I think my job's done. It's time for me to move on. Because all too often, it seems like the higher up in departments that people go, the more forgetful they become and the less willing they are to leave.
Well, I certainly appreciate the more forgetful they become, because I've been working on that. But, it was just a fantastic opportunity coming to Martinsburg. And, you talked about the diversity of West Virginia. Martinsburg is very far east. We're only maybe 85, 90 miles from Baltimore and D.C. It's called the Eastern Panhandle. So it's not what people typically, I think, would think of when I think about West Virginia. It's not coal country and things like that. So it's very diverse, cosmopolitan. It's got a lot of challenges. And, one of the things that a lot of people have asked me is like, wow, how'd you make that transition from Chicago? And, of course, in Chicago, and I worked in, busy districts my whole career, there was a huge difference. I mean, obviously, the gangs, the violence, was off the charts. And, thank God that's not here, particularly organized gangs. But I'll tell you one thing, Jay, which, just shocked me when I got here was the depth of the opioid epidemic. I've never seen anything like that in Chicago.
The opioid epidemic is massive. It's widespread. And I'll be honest with you, Maury, we were dealing with heroin addicts in the 1980s in Baltimore. Baltimore is now known as like the heroin capital of the United States. And you had old junkies, you had young junkies. And the really old ones, they used to have what we call boxing glove hands. Their hands were always swollen and bad veins and everything else. And people may find this hard to believe. We dealt with them so often and so frequently that it became a friendly type relationship. But I'll be honest with you, I've never thought that we would get to the point we are today with the opioid problem in the United States. Never crossed my mind.
Yeah, it was something I wasn't ready for. You know, you read about these things, of course, but then, you know, you get here and, you know, the proximity to Baltimore, you know, is a problem. And, you know, Baltimore is a big, you know, heroin hub for distribution. A lot more's come out of Philly now, too. But the thing that, you know, gets you, maybe, you know, drugs in general, but it seems, and maybe I'm wrong, you know, I think you've seen it as well, with heroin. I mean, it's like a generational thing, and you know, you just see generations of, you know, heroin addicts. Then, of course, in West Virginia, it wasn't just the heroin, but it's the pain pills, excuse me, which was, you know, off the charts. And then, of course, you know, the fentanyl comes in. Yeah, but it's a deep problem. It still persists. You know, I think it's kind of been covered up, you know, by this, you know, Wuhan COVID pandemic hysteria. But it's very deep, and you know, it tears apart families. It tears apart society.
It does. It's devastating communities as well. And by the way, I remember watching. I'm not old enough to remember, but I remember watching how the heroin problem was a big issue in the 1960s and then in the early 70s. But it was primarily confined to inner city America and minority communities. And then in the 80s, it was cocaine and then crack cocaine. And then we had PCP, and we had speed was always an issue. LSD and acid was always an issue. And then heroin. And that seemed to come after the pill epidemic. So many people got addicted to opiates, heavy-duty opiates, as a result of recreational means and also surgical and other things. And when there was a crackdown on that, they all resorted to heroin. And now it seems like that thing's just totally out of control.
It is, and you know, as I said, with this this COVID thing, a lot of this is gone under the radar. But you know, I guarantee you, you know, overdoses and things like that they've probably increased because, you know, people are a little more underground. But you know, it's a thing, and in Martinsburg, you know, we looked at that, and you know, we came up with our own strategy. You know, that hey, we're going to fight this thing, and you know, I'm not saying it's, you know, total rocket science, but you have to fight, you know, drugs on three levels. I mean, one, you know, Jay here, copper for you know, a long time, and you know, drug dealers got to go to jail. I mean, enforcement has to be absolutely critical. You know, if you sell the poison, you've got to get locked up, and that was number one. And then, of course, you know, and this has evolved over time, is that, you know, addiction, when these people are hooked on this stuff, it is a disease, and you have to have, you know, effective, you know, treatment, rehabilitation for people who need it and want it. You have to want it. But to me, the third, maybe long-term most important component is prevention. And, you know, because if you don't reach children, if you don't reach families, there's no way you're going to interdict, you know, any kind of future change in behavior. So, you know, we put together some programs in Martinsburg that I believe have been very effective and should be a model, you know, working with kids in schools and, you know, but at the same time, you know, knocking down the dealers. We put together a great, it's called a drug house ordinance, you know, going after landlords that, you know, permit this type of stuff going on.
We're going to take a short break. Talking with Maury Richards. Maury is retired Chicago Police Lieutenant and also former Martinsburg, West Virginia Police Chief. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Get Get your free ebook on tips to improve your health. They are tips you can start using today, and most will cost you nothing. Plus, the ebook is 100% free. Download the free ebook at lethealthy.com. When we say free, we mean free. Get the ebook for free today at lethealthy.com. That's at lethealthy.com. Again, the website is lethealthy.com.
Indulge in holiday cravings with the nutrition you need from Kachava's all-in-one whole body shake. It's 25 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, greens, and so much more. Try their newest flavors, like the limited edition chocolate mint. With Kachava, you're getting the highest quality ingredients. No fillers, no nonsense. Holiday nutrition has never been this easy or delicious. Go to Kachava, KACHAVA.com, and use code NEWS for 15% off.
Back to our conversation on the Law Enforcement Show with Maury Richards. Maury is retired Chicago Police Department lieutenant, also former chief of police of Martinsburg, West Virginia. We were talking before the break, Maury, about going head on and handling the drug problem in your community. And you talked about several things, one of which is enforcement, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Number two is treatment, which everyone I know has been affected by this, the opioid crisis, and with people ODing, loved ones. We have great partners here that we deal with all the time. They're phenomenal. It's Transformations Treatment Center in Delray Beach, Florida. TransformationsTreatment.center. Look them up or give them a call, 888-991-9725. And the other thing you talked about is education or prevention. And lately, with this anti-police climate, not wanting police in schools, and programs like DARE having their own knocks, are you finding that, or did you find that difficult to implement?
As far as the police in the schools?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and that's, no, we didn't. And that's one of the wonderful things about Martinsburg is that, there's a very good relationship with the community and the schools. One of the initiatives we put together, it's called the Martinsburg Initiative, where our officers, are going directly into schools. And, of course, most departments have a school resource officer, and we had a great one in the high school. But we expanded it way beyond that. Like every elementary and intermediate school, our officers are in there, on a weekly basis. And I made sure it was every officer in the department, me included, including the command staff, going in, first graders all the way up to, 8th grade kids, being in those classrooms, maybe helping out with homework, sometimes, meeting in small groups, just being there to develop that personal connection with kids, because a lot of these kids, there's a lot of bad stuff going on in these homes. I mean, terrible dysfunction, criminal activity, drugs, and, their attitude towards the police is going to be the same as, if they got a, criminal family member. And we wanted to turn that around, and we've done that, made thousands of these contacts, over the last several years. And, it's that type of thing, Jay, that really changes attitudes. And that's, you have to get these kids young, and you have to make that positive connection. And in Martinsburg, we've done that. And what really is scary is that, this defund movement and all this Black Lives Matter nonsense and going after the police, you see these cities breaking these connections with the police and schools, and that's, that's a recipe for disaster.
I sit here and I think back of my time in policing, and I'm of the mindset that I don't think policing has changed dramatically from the 1980s to today, with the exception being technology. The police on the street nowadays have more tools, better communications, body camera videos, all the things we didn't have. But the basics of talking to people and investigation and all that stuff, I don't think really has changed. But I have friends that are retired Baltimore police that have gone on to work at other agencies. One is a school resource officer in Delaware. Great guy. One of the best guys you could ever want to know. A great police. And their school district is talking about defunding, get rid of school resource deputies. I've talked to others where the government, not meaning police departments, but the legislatures are saying we've got to defund the police and get them out of schools. They're a bad influence. And I'll be honest with you, that really doesn't jive with what I experience in policing.
Well, no, you hit it right on the head. I mean, it not only doesn't jive with what you've experienced in the past, it doesn't jive with what's going on today. And here's like a key, poll number that really jumped out at me recently. Despite, all the incredible anti-police propaganda and lies that have been put down on police, 81% of the black community, still wants as many or more police in their neighborhoods. So all this propaganda up on the top, it's really coming from, the elites. It's coming from, media. It's coming from, hardcore left. It doesn't reflect the way people really feel. I mean, people want the police. People want those relationships. They want safety. They want that good relationship. And, one of the things, we talked about it here when I became chief. It's like, the national media, and we got good media in Martinsburg. They're, very fair to us and very supportive. But nationally, you're going to get terrible stories, and you can't fix that. But what you can do is impact, every person you run into, and make sure that every interaction is at, the very highest level. And that's the way you change people, person by person. But you're absolutely right. What's happened is, and this is why, so many of these things are so important on what we're fighting, is that, there's been a takeover, by, radical, left-wing, hard left, Marxists, anti-police, that's, filtrated from the very top. Now it's reaching school districts. You can see it, with prosecuting attorneys, where you got, America haters like George Soros, funding all these campaigns of really anti-police prosecutors. And unfortunately, I think, that's filtered into school districts as well.
Part of the blame, I was thinking about this earlier, as long as I can remember, police departments have been very hush-hush, and people say that we need more transparent. And you know what? I agree with them. But where I take exception is a lot of what these groups that you talked about, I consider them anarchists, but a lot of these groups, we've given them the platform and the opportunity because we've not told them the truth about what's been going on. We've not been telling them the truth about the heroism and going above and beyond the call of duty of our men and women in blue. And I know that we're different colors all across the United States, but we as a blue family have not been telling our stories. We've relied for too long on the news media to do that. They did a horrible job before, and now it's just a plain biased job. What's your thoughts on that?
No, I think, that's all part of the problem. I mean, the reaction of a lot of, police leadership, I think, has been very lax, and, sometimes almost criminal. And here's the biggest thing, what has fueled the violence and the hatred and the anti-police, just the attacks on police, is this totally bogus, false myth, this lie of systemic police racism.
And we're going to talk about that some more when we return. This is the Law Enforcement Today's show. We're talking with Maury Richards, retired Chicago Police Department lieutenant and also former chief of police of Martinsburg, West Virginia. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
How successful has the podcast version of the Law Enforcement Talk radio show become? We are ranked as the #1 law enforcement podcast in the USA, according to Million Podcasts. We are ranked by FeedSpot as one of the top 45 law enforcement podcasts on the web. And according to Good Pods, the Law Enforcement Talk radio show and podcast is number 19 in the top 100 indie news commentary podcasts all-time chart. And all of our podcast episodes are free, always have been, and always will be. A huge thanks to you, Million Podcasts, FeedSpot, and Good Pods. Be sure to tell a friend about the Law Enforcement Talk radio show and podcast. Online at letradio.com.
Return conversation with Maury Richards. Maury is a retired Chicago Police Department lieutenant, and also he is the former chief of police of Martinsburg, West Virginia. He retired from that position. Thank you for your service, Maury. Very much appreciated. Before we went to break, we were talking about, man, we're getting into a conversation that we'll go back to discussing tactics for addressing drug problems in communities in a moment. One of the things that you brought up is this myth that people have of systemic racism. And I hear it all the time. I hear that term, and another term that drives me batty, absolutely out of my mind, is police brutality. First of all, systemic racism. When you look at a police department, you're looking from the outside in. You're not part of the department. They wear a uniform. They have the same clothing, pretty similar appearance, hair standards, everything else, and they can look like a homogenized group of people. But they are made up of individuals. And let's just say my own department, 2,500 to 3,000 people. Each one of them has their own moral compass. They have their own ideas of right and wrong. You're not going to convince them to do things that violate their moral compass because they put on a uniform and take an oath. Nowhere in the oath was there saying, I'm going to violate people's rights. That didn't happen. So I take great exception to that. Another one is police brutality. Anytime there's a use of force, it's police brutality or police violence that's become interchangeable. If that was the case, then then some people called me the most brutal person who ever walked the face of the earth, because I was involved in a lot of stuff. It was a high crime area, and not everybody was peaceful. As a matter of fact, the no-brainer in this is these high crime areas. Look at all the murders. You think that the police are the problem? Where's all the other crime coming from? I go crazy with this systemic racism thing and police brutality. Your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, this systemic racism claim is a total lie, and we're talking about one of the things that I believe that police leadership could have done better and still can do better is that, when people tell these lies, and who are we talking about pushing this? We're talking about the ultra-radical left. We're talking perpetuated, by the media, Hollywood elites, university, administrations. So it's a very, prevalent concept, but it's a total lie. So, here's the Reader's Digest, version of, what's going on there. They talk about systemic racism and all, mostly focusing on police-involved shootings of offenders. Okay, so last year there were 1,004 fatal police shootings. Okay, now if you looked at that media, you'd say, wow, that's a lot of black people that got killed, because, that's the only story you ever see. Well, the facts of the matter are only 27% of those fatalities were black Americans. 55% were white. Okay, 90% of those were with people involved, carrying a weapon, and 95%, they were also either attacking that officer or another person. So they were all, as you said, involved in violent acts, and that's how they got shot. Now, so one of the things, that the left and the media put out is like, 27% were black, but, blacks only constitute 14% of the population. So isn't this disparity proof of this racism? The truth is absolutely not, because, in a major study that was done, they looked at 200 counties across the country. And what was the determining factor was if people were involved in violent crime. So in a county where the majority of white people were committing crime, well, guess what? The majority of white, shooting or suspects being shot by the police, they were going to be white. If the majority of black people are committing crime in a county, the majority of, shooting suspects being shot are going to be black.
But the problem with that, Maury, is it makes total sense. I mean, I'm not trying to be. I'm not trying to be sarcastic, but it is logical. And none of this conversation that people have is based on logic or actual facts. It's based on, I heard on the internet that so-and-so said to so-and-so, and they told me, and therefore I believe it.
Well, you're absolutely right, Jay. And, and as I said, you can't control what media who hates the police is going to say, but what we can control is how we respond to it. So where are the other police leaders standing up and saying this is lies, this is BS? Here's
and
the
they
proof.
Need to be more proactive. Some of the departments are really getting good at their own media relations division, where they will actually break down films of body cam, and they'll be proactive about it. There's other ones who are really good on social media. One of the best is Bangor, Maine. Their social media page is phenomenal, and what they do and how they tell their stories, unbelievable. But I remember being a rookie, and we had a public information officer who was always professional, always sharp. He was available no matter what time of day or night, and I could never recall him ever in public eye throwing police under the bus. And that's the first thing I hear from a lot of public information officers, a lot of police chiefs, a lot of mayors, and also district attorneys. They're going after the police, and it's never the bad guy.
Well, and with the district attorneys, as we talked about, with so many of them now their campaigns being funded by, the radical left, you're seeing more of that. But there's just one other aspect I want to talk about on these police shootings, because the amount of, unarmed, blacks being shot has always been brought up as, proof of the systemic racism. Last year, there were like 14 unarmed black people shot by the police. There were 19 white people, by the way, that no one knows about. So this has to be put in context. First of all, there were approximately 200 million contacts between police and citizens last year, and 14 unarmed blacks are shot. So if you're looking at what's the likelihood of being shot if you're an unarmed black person in this country, you're 3 times more likely to be struck by lightning. Okay, that's how rare it is. But if you look at the media, you'd never think that. The other thing we always have to remember is that just because you're unarmed, and Jay, this is
absolutely
as good as me or any other copper listening who's ever been in a gym and had a fight, just because you're unarmed doesn't mean you're not a threat. I mean, you look at Ferguson, Missouri, Michael Brown. The so-called gentle giant, 6'5", 290, trying to rip a gun out of, policeman Darren Wilson's hand and attacking him. So he was unarmed for a while, until he, was trying to get that gun so he could arm himself. So, so once again, it's so rare that this happens, but that's not, the public perception.
But they use the term systemic and implicit, right, and that it's system-wide, and it comes from a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense, but it comes from government, which, by the way, is elected by the people that are complaining, and they set the rules and the laws, and those were elected by the people who are complaining. And a great story, which when we return, I'll tell you, my career was ended by an unarmed man who tried to shoot me with my service weapon while still in my hand, causing lifelong irreparable injury. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com. That's letradio.com. There you'll find episodes of the show available as a podcast after airing on radio. And they're always free. There's 700 plus episodes on there right now. There's blogs. Get information about our sponsors. All that and much more at letradio.com. Again, the website is letradio.com. Back to our conversation with Maury Richards, retired Chicago Police Department lieutenant, also former chief of police of Martinsburg, West Virginia. Before we went to break, Maury, we're talking about unarmed people, whether they're a threat or not. And the term unarmed is something the media loves to throw around. I can just tell you from my own experience, I was involved in 4 shootings in my career. The first 2, I never fired back because it was obvious to me at the time that the threat had ceased. The other 2 were different. And the last one was a car thief who was transporting a lot of crack cocaine. And while trying to arrest him, trying to reholster my weapon, he got a hold of it while still in my hand, and a fight ensued. And thank God it was a revolver, because it was pointed at my head while still in my hand, and we were firing rounds off. This man was actively trying to shoot me, and I was trying to shoot him. And fortunately, both of us survived. Long story short, I thought I sprained my wrist, and I wound up having 3 surgeries, 2 steel plates, destroyed the cartilage in my wrist, just in fight over the weapon. But that was an unarmed man who was clearly armed at some point with my weapon, and he was trying to execute me on the street. And I would have done anything at that point to survive. And that happens far more often than people think. Just 'cause they get lost in this term unarmed, and also being shot in the back, which we can talk about another day. In your experience, did you ever encounter that where people made an attempt to disarm you?
Well, I've been in a number of physical confrontations. It never got to a direct disarming, but I mean, I absolutely know what you're talking about, and I'm sorry you got hurt, but thank God you're alive. And
yeah, thank God I didn't get shot in the face.
Handle yourself.
Yeah, look, it could have been much worse, and my days of feeling sorry for myself over that are long gone. But the other thing about this is, and I want people just to use their brain for a moment. I know it's asking a lot. When people are on their phone, their smartphone, they see something on Facebook, and they don't check it, or other social media, they share it right away. You got Google it. Marquise Pouncey took the name of Antoine Rose Jr. off his helmet, put up a fallen officer, because he said, I looked into it. I saw the details, and I should have done that. And my hat's off to them for doing that. People who have this idea that police in general in the United States are racist and looking for excuses to kill people and kill black people, I want them to do some basic numbers. There's roughly, we'll estimate, 800,000 police in the United States. If that were true, you would have at least 400,000 people a year being shot and killed by police, and of that, 300,000 plus would be black. The truth is, those numbers are nowhere near that. They're like 1,000.
Yeah.
Of all races.
Well, yeah, 1,000 of all races, and you touched upon a really important thing here, Jay. These attacks on the police. We've already seen more of them, and just look at those, L.A. deputies, and that assassination attempt. They're shooting at officers' houses in New Jersey.
It's horrible.
And what's fueling this? I mean, of course, a lot of it, driven, by this radical left who wants to destroy our entire country. But people feel, twisted people somehow feel, justified that, hey, I'm going to go, kill a Nazi. I'm going to go, kill a racist. And that's why it's so important, to fight these lies, because as long as these lies persist, I mean, one, we're never going to make meaningful change, and everyone can agree that policing can get better.
Sure.
But attacks are going to increase on police. This violent mob rule is going to increase, and here's one of the biggest things that no one sees. The real violence, if you're talking about, the tragedy of black violence, is in these inner cities, and that's going to increase because, last year there were over 7,400, black people that were homicide, victims in this country. You know how many were killed by police? 0.2%.
Yeah.
93% were killed by other blacks, and so who was, saving you're talking about Black Lives Matter, who's saving these black lives in your community? It's the police. I've been there, you've been there, anyone in NYPD, from 10 years, like say 1991, or maybe 20 years to 2010 or 11. I mean, these homicide rates dropped incredibly, 50%, 60%. Those were black lives saved. And who did it? It was the police, working with the communities, but also being proactive, going after criminals, putting people, where they, putting dangerous criminals where they need to be, and that's behind bars, with the total support of the decent people in those communities. That's why you get 81% of Black Americans wanting more of the same police.
And they're still out there. The good people are still out there. They just got to start speaking up. And
yeah.
I understand why people are reluctant to do that on social media. I understand why people are reluctant to do that because they get labeled and attacked by these groups of people. And at some point, look, I'm not advocating violence whatsoever. But at some point, if you push me far enough, I'm going to take the gloves off and say, all right, I'm not moving anymore. And you and I are going to have to deal with it.
No, you're right. And I tell you, everything we've talked about today, the common sense, people know that, are there a few bad police out there? Yeah, just like any other profession. And I'll tell you, Jay, we've both been in police for a long time, and I know you'll agree, who hates bad cops the most? Good cops.
Absolutely.
That's who hates bad cops, okay?
And we want them gone. And we've always wanted them gone. And again, you got to use logic. People have this mindset that, look, I'm not going to say anything because there's this thin blue wall of silence. Well, here's the reality. I've got a wife, I got kids, I've got health insurance. I'm not going to risk all that for some guy who is a jackhammer and does stupid things or unethical things, because that's what happens. Those guys wind up getting caught first. So they don't do that. No one does it. Who's going to go to prison for someone who's doing illegal stuff?
Right.
I don't know of anybody that's willing to do that. And certainly not in the police world. There's so many things we didn't get to talk about that we've got to talk about in the future. One of the things I really want to discuss with you, and we unfortunately ran out of time, is what we can do as communities to go after these drug neighborhoods and how badly they impact our neighborhoods and certain tactics that we use. And unfortunately, we're about out of time. Are there some projects you're working on that you want to publicize?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things I'm still involved with, of course, is the Martinsburg Initiative, working with, schools, kids, and the police. But, I'll tell you, if we allow this country to go where the radical left wants to take it, we won't have a country anymore. And, what we see on these streets in these, Democrat, run cities, Portland, Seattle, New York, Chicago, that's going to be what we're all in for. And, I'd just say, one last thing, we talk about a lot of common sense and where people are coming from, and there's a silent majority out there. I agree. But that majority can't afford to be silent anymore, because otherwise this country is going to turn into something that we'll never want to see. It'll be a total disaster, and we can't let that happen.
One of the things you just hit on, I took my first trip to Ireland a couple of years ago. My grandparents immigrated there from.
Really? Okay.
And
my mom grew up there.
And the funny thing is, that's a country. The Republic of Ireland is about 4.75 million people. And when I was there, they were up in arms because the year before they had like 79 homicides with almost 5 million people. Baltimore, my old department, my old city, had 330 out of a population of about 660,000. Then you add in New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, other big cities, and the numbers are staggering. I looked at, since 1980, I think it's somewhere around 15,000 people have been murdered in Baltimore alone. I don't have the exact numbers. It might even be higher than that. We have numbers that entire countries don't have in small cities. And if we don't support our police, man, and demand more from them and demand better and demand politicians actually back them up, we are in for a world of hurt. Maury, thanks so much for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Show. Very much appreciated.
Thanks for this opportunity, Jay. It was great talking to you.
I'd like to thank our guests for coming on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is a nationally syndicated weekly radio show broadcast on numerous AM and FM radio stations across the country. We're always adding more affiliate stations. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, which is always free, please do me a favor and tell a friend or two or three. I'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening. Happy holidays! Want to give your host a gift? Consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show this holiday season. It really helps the show grow. From all of us at Believe, have a Merry Christmas, everyone, and a Happy Holiday.